Maverick didn't just break the mold of 1950s television, it shattered it. What started as a simple Western became a con game that fooled the network, launched a superstar, and almost destroyed its own leading man. The scripts were banned, the star walked off set. In one episode, they literally ran out of film and had to improvise the entire thing. These are 20 weird facts about Maverick, and the bonus? There's a reason James Garner never wore a gun. Shuffle the deck, this hand gets wild fast. Maverick wasn't supposed to be funny. When Roy Huggins pitched the show to Warner Brothers in 1957, executives wanted another Cheyenne, another Gunsmoke, another serious adult Western to dominate Sunday nights. The format was simple: lone hero, dusty trail, moral lessons, shoot the bad guys. But Huggins had a different idea. He wanted a coward, not a hero who stood tall and drew fast, but a gambler who'd rather talk his way out of trouble or run if the odds weren't in his favor. Warner Brothers hated it. They told Huggins no audience would root for a protagonist who avoided fights, who cared more about money than justice, who'd cheat at cards if he could get away with it. But Huggins stood firm. He said television was drowning in noble cowboys, and someone needed to be different. The studio reluctantly agreed to film a pilot, but only because Huggins had delivered hits before. They gave him a tiny budget, minimal promotion, and zero faith. What they got instead was a character who redefined the genre. Bret Maverick didn't wear a white hat or a black hat. He wore a gambler's smile and played every situation like a poker hand. And when the pilot aired, audiences didn't just like him, they loved him. Because for the first time, a Western hero felt human, flawed, funny, and real. The network tried to make another Cheyenne. Roy Huggins gave them something they never expected. James Garner wasn't the first choice. He wasn't even the second. Warner Brothers wanted a name, someone with Western credentials, someone who could carry a series. They approached several established actors, offered them the role of Bret Maverick, and each one turned it down. Why? Because the character was too risky. No one wanted to play a coward on television in 1957. Cowboys were heroes. They stood and fought. They didn't fold a hand and walk away from a gunfight. But Garner, a 29-year-old contract player with barely any credits, saw something different. He'd served in the Korean War. He knew real bravery wasn't about standing in the street waiting to get shot. It was about survival, about thinking fast, about knowing when to hold and when to fold. When he read the script, he didn't see a coward. He saw a strategist, someone smart enough not to die for no reason. Garner auditioned with a casual, almost lazy delivery. He smiled through tension. He made the danger feel like a game. And Roy Huggins sat forward in his chair. That was it. That was Bret Maverick. The studio still hesitated. They worried Garner was too unknown, too inexperienced, too relaxed. But Huggins pushed. He told them Garner had something rare: charm without effort, toughness without posturing. And when they finally gave him the role, James Garner didn't just play Bret Maverick, he became him. Smooth, sarcastic, and impossible to hate. They shot the pilot in 6 days. 6. Most television shows took 2 weeks minimum. Feature films took months. But Warner Brothers wasn't investing in Maverick. They were testing it. The budget was razor thin, the crew was bare bones, and the schedule was punishing. Garner worked 16-hour days, filming scene after scene with almost no breaks. There were no second takes unless something went catastrophically wrong. The director kept the cameras rolling and hoped for the best. Lighting setups were fast and functional. Costumes were pulled from the studio's existing Western stock. Even the sets were recycled from other shows. If you look closely, you'll see the same saloon, the same jail, the same dusty street that appeared in a dozen other Warner Brothers productions. But none of that mattered, because what Garner brought to the screen couldn't be faked with time or money. He had presence. Every scene crackled, every line felt lived in. And when the pilot wrapped, the crew knew they'd caught something special. Roy Huggins watched the rough cut in silence. No notes, no changes. He just smiled. Because in 6 chaotic days, with no budget and no faith from the network, they'd made something that didn't feel like television. It felt like lightning in a bottle. And once Warner Brothers saw the audience response, They wanted more. A lot more. The leisurely pace of Brett Maverick's life was about to collide with the brutal speed of television production. Maverick's shooting schedule was designed to kill its star. By the end of the first season, James Garner was filming 5 days a week, sometimes 6. Each episode took 7 days to complete. Do the math, there was no break, no rest, no time to recover between episodes. Garner would finish one script on Friday night and start the next one Monday morning. He was in every scene. He carried every episode. And the studio didn't care. Warner Brothers operated on the old studio system model. Actors were property. You worked when they told you to work, you filmed what they told you to film, and you didn't complain. But Garner was exhausted. He started losing weight. His voice grew hoarse. Dark circles formed under his eyes. On set, he'd collapse between takes, falling asleep in his costume while the crew adjusted lights. His co-stars worried. The crew whispered. But the network kept pushing. They had a hit. Maverick was pulling huge ratings. They couldn't slow down now. So, Roy Huggins came up with a solution. A desperate, brilliant, unprecedented solution. He created a brother. Jack Kelly was cast as Bart Maverick, Brett's equally charming, equally cowardly sibling. The plan? Alternate episodes. 1 week, Garner starred. The next week, Kelly took over. It would give Garner time to breathe, time to rest, time to stay alive. The network approved it. And suddenly, Maverick wasn't just one gambler anymore. It was 2. The show had been saved by splitting the deck. Jack Kelly hated being second. He was a solid actor, experienced, professional, and talented. But no matter what he did, he wasn't James Garner. Audiences made it clear. Letters poured into the network. Where's Brett? When does the real Maverick come back? We want Garner. It wasn't personal. Bart Maverick was written almost identically to Brett. Same cowardice, same charm, same poker face. But something about Garner's delivery, his timing, his effortless cool, it couldn't be replicated. Kelly tried. He gave strong performances. He brought his own spin to the character. He made Bart distinct, a bit more cautious, a bit more earnest. But viewers didn't care. They wanted the original, and Kelly felt it every single week. On set, the crew treated him professionally. Garner was friendly, never competitive, but Kelly knew the truth. He was the backup, the relief pitcher, the safety net that allowed the real star to survive. It ate at him, not because he disliked Garner, but because he was good enough to lead his own show. He should have been the star of something else. Instead, he was the understudy in someone else's spotlight. Years later, Kelly admitted the experience was humbling and painful. He loved the show. He loved the character. But he never escaped Garner's shadow. And in a way, that defined his career. He was Bart Maverick, forever the brother, forever second place. And in television, second place is still forgotten. The writers ran out of scripts. By the middle of season 2, Maverick's brutal production schedule had exhausted everyone. The show aired weekly. Each episode took a week to film. That left zero margin for error. And when several writers missed deadlines, production ground to a halt. They had actors, sets, cameras, crew, everything ready to go, but no script. Panic spread through the lot. Warner Brothers threatened to cancel the show. Roy Huggins refused. Instead, he did something insane. He told the writers to steal, not from other shows, from classic literature, public domain stories, Shakespeare, Dickens, O. Henry. Take the structure, change the names, transplant it to the Old West, and make Brett Maverick the lead. The result was some of the most creative television ever made. One episode was basically Cyrano de Bergerac with poker. Another borrowed from The Count of Monte Cristo. A third lifted from The Taming of the Shrew, and the best part? Audiences loved them. They didn't care that Maverick was retelling old stories. They just wanted to watch Garner charm his way through impossible situations. Critics praised the show's intelligence. The network stopped complaining, and the writers, exhausted and desperate, found a lifeline. If you couldn't write an original Maverick script fast enough, you could borrow from the greatest storytellers in history. It wasn't plagiarism, it was adaptation. and it saved the series from collapse while accidentally making it smarter than any Western on television. They cast a third Maverick, and nobody wanted him. By season 3, the two-brother rotation still wasn't enough. Garner needed more time off. Kelly couldn't carry the load alone, so the studio made a move that baffled everyone. They introduced a cousin, Bo Maverick, played by Roger Moore. Yes, that Roger Moore, the future James Bond. The network thought he'd bring British sophistication to the frontier. The writers thought he was completely wrong for the role, and audiences, they hated him. It wasn't Moore's fault. He was charming, handsome, talented, but he was English, playing a Texas gambler, with an accent he couldn't hide. Every line sounded like 007 had wandered onto a Western set by mistake. The chemistry was off, the tone felt forced, and worst of all, he wasn't James Garner. Viewers tuned out, ratings dropped, letters of complaint flooded in. Even Garner privately admitted the casting felt desperate. Moore himself later said he knew it wasn't working. He tried to adjust, to Americanize his delivery, to find the rhythm. But Maverick had a very specific tone, loose, sarcastic, grounded. Moore brought elegance. And elegance didn't play cards in a dusty saloon. The experiment lasted 1 season. Bo Maverick appeared in a handful of episodes, then quietly disappeared. No explanation, no farewell. He just vanished from the family tree. Roger Moore moved on, James Bond was waiting, and Maverick went back to what worked. 2 brothers, no cousins, and definitely no British accents. James Garner walked off the set in 1960, not for a day, not for a week. He walked off and never came back. By the 4th season, Garner was done. The schedule had destroyed him. He'd been working non-stop for 3 years, filming episodes back-to-back, doing press, attending events, trapped in a contract that paid him almost nothing compared to what the studio was making. Warner Brothers was pulling in millions from Maverick. Garner was getting a flat salary, no profit sharing, no bonuses, no control. And when he asked for a raise, they refused. So Garner did something almost no television actor had done before. He sued. He claimed Warner Brothers had violated his contract by forcing him to work during a writer's strike. Technically, he was right. Legally, it was complicated, but morally, Garner didn't care. He was exhausted, underpaid, and tired of being treated like property. The lawsuit dragged on for months. The studio tried to force him back. They threatened him. They smeared him in the press. They cast him as ungrateful. But Garner held firm, and in the end, he won. The court ruled in his favor. His contract was void. He was free, but Maverick wasn't. The show tried to continue without him. Jack Kelly became the sole lead. New characters were introduced, but the magic was gone. Ratings collapsed, and by 1962, Maverick was canceled. James Garner had killed his own show, but he'd also freed himself, and Hollywood would never forget it. The show faked an entire episode. It's one of the most legendary moments in television history. Midway through production, Warner Brothers ran out of money. A guest star didn't show up. Key scenes couldn't be filmed, and they had an air date in 5 days with nothing ready. So Roy Huggins and the writers came up with a plan so insane it almost sounds like a Maverick Con. They built an episode out of clips from previous episodes. They called it Shady Deal at Sunny Acres, and on paper, it shouldn't have worked. Brett Maverick, angry about being conned, tells the story of how it happened, and as he narrates, the episode cuts to footage from a dozen earlier shows. Different episodes, different storylines, different villains. But the writers stitched them together with new narration and a few fresh shots of Garner in a room, talking to the camera, and somehow, it played. The pacing worked, the humor landed, Garner's voiceover tied everything together. And when it aired, audiences loved it. Critics called it clever. Other shows started copying the format. What was supposed to be a desperate cost-cutting measure became a creative experiment, a piece of television innovation born from pure chaos. It proved something important. Maverick wasn't just about the plot. It was about Garner's charm, his voice, his presence. You didn't even need a real story. You just needed him talking, smiling, and dealing the cards. The show had become bigger than its own episodes. It was a personality, and that personality could sell anything. Brett Maverick never wore a gun. Look closely at any episode. He's got the hat, the coat, the vest, the boots, but no holster, no pistol on his hip. It wasn't an accident, it was a statement. Roy Huggins wanted a Western hero who didn't rely on violence, and James Garner agreed. He'd been to war, he knew what guns really did, and he didn't want to play another cowboy who solved problems by drawing faster. So Brett Maverick became the only gunslinger on television who didn't sling guns. He carried a Derringer hidden in his coat, a gambler's weapon, small, sneaky, a last resort. But mostly, he relied on his brain, on charm, on talking his way out or running if he had to. And it worked. It made him different from every other Western hero. Audiences responded. Kids didn't run around pretending to be Maverick in gunfights. They pretended to be clever, to outwit the bad guys, to fold when the odds were bad and bet big when they knew they'd win. That was the real revolution. Maverick taught a generation that being smart was cooler than being fast. That survival mattered more than pride, and that, sometimes the best move wasn't to fight at all. It was to shuffle the deck and deal yourself a better hand.
I don't know why, but
One episode was banned before it even aired. The writers had crafted a storyline where Brett Maverick exposed a corrupt sheriff working with cattle rustlers. Standard Western fare, except for one problem. The sheriff's name, his description, his mannerisms, they all pointed to a real lawman in Arizona, someone still alive, someone with lawyers. Warner Brothers received a letter threatening legal action if the episode ran. The studio panicked. They'd already filmed it, already paid for it, already scheduled it, but they pulled it anyway. The episode was locked in a vault, never broadcast during the original run. Garner was furious. He said the story was fiction, that any resemblance was coincidental. But the network wouldn't risk it. For decades, the episode remained unseen. It finally surfaced in syndication years later, heavily edited, with the sheriff's name changed and several scenes cut entirely. But the original version, the one that caused the panic, that's still locked away. A piece of Maverick history that almost destroyed the show before lawyers made it disappear. In television, sometimes the most dangerous stories aren't the ones with violence or controversy. They're the ones that hit too close to home. The theme song almost didn't happen. Warner Brothers wanted something traditional, orchestral, sweeping, the kind of music every other Western used, but Maverick wasn't every other Western. Composer David Budolph and lyricist Paul Francis Webster pitched something different. A jaunty, almost playful melody with lyrics that told you everything about Brett Maverick before he even appeared on screen. The studio hated it. Too light, they said. Too comedic. It doesn't sound heroic, but Roy Huggins fought for it. He told them the music had to match the character, and the character was a gambler who smiled through danger. When the theme finally aired, with its distinctive guitar opening and bouncing rhythm, audiences were hummed along. It became instantly recognizable. Kids whistled it on playgrounds. Adults quoted the lyrics. And suddenly, every television show wanted a theme song that told a story. Maverick didn't just change Westerns on screen, it changed how they sounded. That simple, cheerful melody became one of the most iconic pieces of television music in history. And it almost never made it past the studio executives who thought heroism had to sound serious. James Garner did his own stunts until he couldn't. Early in the series, he insisted on doing everything himself. Horse falls, bar fights, rooftop chases, all Garner. He'd been an athlete before acting. He knew how to take a hit, and he wanted Maverick to feel authentic. But television doesn't care about your body. By season 2, Garner had injured his back, twisted his ankle, and taken so many punches to the face during fight. Scenes that his jaw started clicking when he talked. The studio didn't slow down. They just hired a stunt double and hoped audiences wouldn't notice. But Garner kept pushing himself. In one episode, he insisted on doing a scene where Brett Maverick jumps from a moving wagon. The stunt coordinator begged him not to. Garner did it anyway. He landed wrong. Something in his knee popped. He finished the scene, limping through the rest of the take, smiling like nothing hurt. Then, he collapsed. The medic rushed over. Garner was out for 2 weeks. When he came back, the studio finally put their foot down. No more stunts. Use the double. Save yourself. Garner agreed, but only because his body had already betrayed him. Years later, he'd still feel that knee injury, a permanent reminder that television takes everything and asks for more. The poker games were real, sort of. Between takes, the cast and crew would gather around tables and actually play. Garner was good, really good. He'd learned poker in the army, playing for money with soldiers who knew every trick, every tell, every angle. On the Maverick set, he cleaned out half the crew in the first month. Writers, cameramen, even directors lost money to him. It got so bad that people stopped playing with Garner, so he started teaching instead. He'd sit with younger actors and show them how to read faces, how to control their own expressions, how to know when someone was bluffing. Those lessons bled into the show. Watch Garner play poker on screen. He's not acting, he's actually playing. The way he handles cards, the way he watches his opponents, the casual confidence, that's real skill. And it made every poker scene in Maverick feel authentic, because it was. Other westerns faked their card games with stage drama and obvious tells. Maverick let James Garner actually play. And audiences, especially those who knew poker, could tell the difference. It was one more detail that separated the show from everything else on television. Even the gambling was honest. They filmed the same saloon 200 times. Warner Brothers had a limited backlot. Same Western street, same buildings, same interiors. Every episode of Maverick used the exact same sets, just redressed with different props or lighting. The saloon where Brett played poker appeared in dozens of episodes, sometimes multiple times per episode, playing different locations. Audiences started to notice. Letters came in asking if every town in the Old West had the same bar. The writers had to get creative. They started writing jokes about it. In one episode, Brett walks into a saloon and comments that it looks exactly like the one in the last town. Breaking the fourth wall before breaking the fourth wall was cool. It was a desperate move to cover a budget limitation, but it worked. It became part of Maverick's charm. The show acknowledged its own limitations and made them funny. Other series tried to hide their cheap production values. Maverick made them the part of the comedy, and somehow, that honesty made viewers love it more. They weren't watching a realistic Old West. They were watching a television show about a gambler, and the show knew it. That self-awareness became revolutionary. Warner Brothers tried to replace James Garner with his stunt double. When Garner sued and walked off, the studio was desperate. They'd already sold advertising. They had episodes scheduled. They needed Brett Maverick, but they didn't have James Garner. So someone had a wild idea. Garner's stunt double, a man named Lyle Betker, looked similar from a distance. Similar build, similar walk, similar enough that in wide shots you might not notice. The plan was to film entire episodes using the double, shooting from behind or in shadow, using a voice actor to dub Garner's dialogue in post-production. They actually filmed test footage. It looked terrible. The double couldn't capture Garner's casual grace. The voice actor couldn't match his timing, and when Roy Huggins saw the test, he shut it down immediately. He told the studio they were insane. You can't fake James Garner. The audience will know. They'll feel it, and they'll abandon the show. The studio reluctantly agreed. The test footage was destroyed, and Maverick continued with Jack Kelly as the sole lead until the series quietly died. It was one of the most desperate, cynical attempts to replace a star in television history, and thankfully, it failed before it ever reached the screen. The show predicted its own death. In season 4, with Garner gone and ratings falling, the writers created an episode called The Judas Mask. It was about a con man pretending to be someone he's not, fooling people into believing a lie until the truth catches up. The metaphor wasn't subtle. Maverick without James Garner was a con, a fake, an imposter wearing the original's face, and the writers knew it. They loaded the script with references to things ending, to games being over, to the house always winning in the end. Jack Kelly delivered the lines with a weariness that felt real, because it was. He knew the show was dying. The crew knew, the network knew, but they kept filming, kept pretending, kept running the con until the money ran out. When The Judas Mask aired, critics called it surprisingly dark for Maverick. They didn't realize they were watching a eulogy. The show was saying goodbye to itself, one episode at a time, knowing that without Garner, it was already over. They just hadn't called time of death yet. Television rarely gets to write its own ending. Maverick wrote it in code, and nobody noticed until years later. James Garner and Jack Kelly never spoke again. After the show ended, the two men who'd shared the Maverick name for 5 years went their separate ways. No public feud, no dramatic fallout, just silence. Garner moved on to movies, to the Rockford Files, to a career that made him a legend. Kelly continued working, steady roles in television, respectable work, but never another hit. And somewhere in that divergence, the friendship ended. Years later, when asked about Kelly, Garner would give diplomatic answers, professional, polite, empty. Kelly did the same. They'd been brothers on screen, but in real life, they were just two actors who'd survived the same brutal system. Nothing more. When Kelly died in 1992, Garner didn't attend the funeral. He sent flowers, a card, the kind of gesture you make for someone you once knew, but no longer carry with you. It's one of Hollywood's quieter tragedies. Two men who'd saved each other's careers, who'd alternated episodes so both could survive, who'd smiled together in 100 publicity photos, and in the end, they couldn't even share a conversation. Maverick brought them together, but James Garner's escape tore them apart, and neither man ever explained why. The show launched a genre that killed westerns. After Maverick, every network wanted a comedic western. The Wild Wild West, F Troop, Alias Smith and Jones, dozens of shows that played the frontier for laughs. For a few years, it worked. Audiences loved the fresh take. But then the market flooded. Too many comedic westerns, not enough serious ones. And slowly, the entire genre started dying. By the early 1970s, westerns were gone from television. Bonanza ended. Gunsmoke finally rode off. And Maverick, the show that revolutionized westerns, was partially responsible for killing them. It's a strange legacy. Roy Huggins wanted to make something different, and he succeeded so completely that everyone copied it until the copying destroyed the original format. James Garner later joked that Maverick was too successful for its own good. It proved you could mock westerns and audiences would love it. And once audiences started laughing, they couldn't stop. They couldn't go back to taking cowboys seriously. The genre had been broken, and Maverick held the hammer. For years, networks tried to revive westerns. They failed. It took decades before shows like Deadwood and Justified could approach the Old West again. And even then, they had to acknowledge Maverick's shadow. The gambler who smiled had changed everything. And television never forgot. James Garner played Brett Maverick 3 times. Once in 1957, when he created the character. Once in 1978, when he returned for a TV movie called The New Maverick, testing whether audiences still cared. They did. And finally in 1981, when he starred in Brett Maverick, a new series that lasted 1 season. Older, slower, but still charming. Still running cons, still avoiding gunfights. The final series wasn't a hit. Times had changed. Television had moved on, but Garner didn't care. He'd spent his entire career trying to escape Brett Maverick, playing other roles, proving he was more than a gambler with a smile. And in the end, he came back. Because Maverick wasn't just a character, it was the role that freed him from Warner Brothers, the role that taught him to fight studios, the role that made him a star. And when the cameras rolled one last time, Garner slipped back into that lazy confidence like he'd never left. Older, sure, but still Maverick, still dealing, still playing the odds. The series ended quietly, no fanfare, no finale. It just stopped airing. But James Garner had made his peace. He'd returned to where it started and proved one final time that some characters never die. They just fold when the hand runs cold. Roy Huggins kept a photo on his desk for 40 years. It wasn't of the cast. It wasn't a poster. It was a single frame from the very first episode. James Garner, mid-scene, looking directly at the camera with that slight smirk. The one that said he knew he was conning you and dared you to call him on it. Huggins never explained why he kept it, but everyone who worked with him knew. That photo represented everything Maverick was supposed to be. A gambler who refused to play by the rules, who smiled at danger, who knew when to walk away. Huggins had fought the studio to make that character real, and that photo proved he'd won. When Huggins died in 2002, his family found the photo still on his desk, framed, faded, but still there. Because Maverick wasn't just a television show. It was the moment a writer looked at the system and said no. The moment an actor chose intelligence over heroism. The moment television realized it could be smarter, funnier, and more human than anyone expected. And that photo, that single frozen smile, captured all of it.